Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three martinis coming up.
That's right. It is time for Three Martini Lunch. My name is Craig Collins, filling in. That is Jim Garrity, telling us many stories that seem to deserve martinis before we started this recording today. But we're going to go right into the things that are good, bad, and crazy today. The good, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that you picked this one, Jim, is us giving weapons back to Ukraine, us restoring military aid to Ukraine. Big announcement from President Trump. What would you like to say about this?
Sure. Well, first of all, this seemed like a really dramatic change from just about a week ago.
Yeah.
White House spokesman Anna Kelly had said that the Defense Department had decided to halt some shipments to Ukraine after they found certain military stockpiles to be low. Longtime listeners to this program know that the cause of Ukrainian independence and standing up to Russian military aggression is a cause that's near and dear to my heart. But I would acknowledge that if the U.S., has a certain stockpile of weapons that is low that we need for our defense and the defense of other allies, that's not a crazy concern. But it also seemed like we were not going to send air defense, Patriot missile battery type things to Ukraine when Ukraine really needed them. Russia continues to bombard the country with everything from cruise missiles to ballistic missiles, and particularly in civilian areas. And so, not quite out of the blue, but certainly surprising, a bunch of people who, were responding to the move last week, President Trump said Monday that we're going to send more weapons. Quote, "We have to," Trump said of the U.S. providing weapons to Ukraine, speaking to reporters at a dinner with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Quote, "They have to be able to defend themselves. They're getting hit very hard now." He said the shipment will include defensive weapons primarily because, quote, so many people are dying in that mess, unquote. And air defense missiles were among those weapons paused. I had said this a little bit tongue-in-cheek in my Morning Jolt newsletter today, Craig, but not entirely. It was that,
Sure.
Trump is the greatest president of all time. And I don't, okay, all right, fine. Lincoln's up there, Washington's up there. But look, Trump had said throughout the campaign trail, I'm going to end this war in 24 hours. Well, obviously that's not the case. Obviously that was an unrealistic expectation. When you talk to the Ukrainians, they're like, look, we'd love peace, but we want a just peace. And whether that includes they get all of their territory back, including Crimea, whether it means, we can decide on what that is.
Yeah.
But you can't leave Russia's aggression rewarded. And I think, helping Ukraine is, we should be standing up for our allies. Sure. We should be standing up against the Russians. And so I'm glad to hear this. Details of what's going to be sent still need to be worked out. I think basically, send what we can spare.
Yeah.
Whatever we've got, chances are the Ukrainians could use. It's fair to ask the Europeans to do their fair share. It sounds like the Europeans have been stepping up in our absence, including military aid. For a long stretch, they were doing more in terms of economic aid and humanitarian aid, which is important. But I can understand people saying, hey, it'd be nice if our NATO allies could contribute what they could. I believe Denmark has now sent them all of their artillery shells. The Nordics have been very good. Poland's been very good. Basically, The closer you are to Russia, the more likely you are to help Ukraine.
Sure.
But anyway, this is one of the best martinis in a long time. Amen, Mr. President. Good for you, Mr. President. Everybody who says I'm a TDS infected, look, when he does the right thing, I will stand up and give him that standing up ovation. And so good for you, Mr. President.
Well, and I do think it's interesting that he had that hour-long phone call with Putin on the 4th of July, and then the attacks on Ukraine were ramped up, and now this is the response to the United States, which, as you said, is the exact right response to the further or the increased aggression going on there. I would like to just touch on it for a second. I don't know if this is talking about it too much. You said, what does peace look like? Do you actually think that Crimea is something that should be given back to Ukraine to finish this war?
I think in a perfect world, I would love that. If you talk to Ukrainians, they say the war really began in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea. I can understand why to a Ukrainian getting that territory back is really important. As an American, that's a second order concern to me. I think the primary concern has to be mitigating or nullifying Russia's ability to threaten our NATO allies, which we are treaty obligated to defend, but also just to nullify their ability to do aggression towards anybody, even those outside of NATO, being Ukraine, Georgia, anywhere in Central Asia, and any place where Putin has this habit of trying to start these frozen conflict zones. Transnistria and Moldova is another example of that. So I want Russian military aggression as impeded and hindered as much as possible. And I think by arming Ukraine to the teeth is the most cost-effective way, and it does not cost American lives. So, I think Trump has given Putin every chance, more than every chance, too many chances. and Putin has metaphorically spat in his face, and now he's paying the price for it.
Yeah, no, and I think it's really powerful what you said is the Russian aggression cannot be, rewarded. I absolutely understand that.
Yeah.
Is there any way you want to close that other than that? Sorry.
No, but Craig, I imagine you're probably seeing more worry creases in the forehead of Vladimir Putin. I suspect he might not be getting as much sleep as he usually does. Maybe he's got dark bags under those eyes. And let's face it, Vladimir, most skincare products aren't made for men. Craig would call that a transition. And when they're made for men, they're usually not great. They're overly complicated, packed with questionable ingredients, or they just don't deliver results. But Caldera Labs high-performance skincare is made just for men. Simple, effective, and science-backed. It's tested and trusted. Every formula takes years to develop, and nothing launches until it works. Their products will not clog your pores because all products are non-comedogenic. Means they're very effective and they're not comedy. That's what it means to be non-comedogenic. It's cruelty-free, no animal testing ever, and it's plastic neutral. One product sold means 1 unit of plastic removed from the environment. Skincare does not have to be complicated, but it should be good. Upgrade your routine with Caldera Lab and see the difference for yourself. Go to calderalab.com/3ml. That's the numeral 3 and the letters M and L, and use 3ml at checkout for 20% off your first order.
And we are back to our second of the 3 Martini Lunch. This is the bad, and this is a brilliant decision to be the bad because it's insane. I keep calling him the crazy guy out of New York. I don't even like using his name, but he will inevitably be the mayor. And you have a heck of a story about how weird it is that media is totally fine with a Democrat lying. They're not so happy about it when Republicans do it, but when a Democrat does it, it'll be okay. This guy's a socialist anyway. Let's just ignore it. What do you got on this one, Jim?
Zoran Mamdani, who, again, is the most likely next mayor of New York City. Eric Adams, the incumbent, is still running as an independent. I guess there's a chance he could beat him, but, you're a Democrat in New York City. You usually have a pretty significant advantage. The New York Times ran a big story on July 4th. People may not have noticed. They're busy doing backyard barbecues and watching fireworks and stuff. Sure. But Zoran Mamdani applied to Columbia University, which ironically his father was a professor there. And he identified his race as Asian and Black or African American as a high school senior when applying there. Now, Mamdani's heritage is Indian. He was born in Uganda, so some people would say, well, if you squint, then technically he is African American. Sure. By the way, not an American citizen at that point. He didn't become a U.S. citizen until 2018. Now, whether you think that's, it's close enough, or, well, that's not really what the university meant when they asked that kind of a question. Look, back in April, Mamdani was doing this interview. It's this rather outlandish street interview, but the question was, would you claim African-American status like Elon Musk? Elon Musk was born in South Africa, for those wondering. Mamdani replied with a laugh, no, I would not claim that status. I'm proud to be Ugandan, but I think that is misleading. Well, apparently teenage Mamdani felt differently. So I'd written today's Morning Jolt, Craig, that I called the Mamdani campaign for a comment, and the whole music was Soul Man. Only connoisseurs of now deeply racially insensitive movies from the 80s will really get that joke. But so ever since then, other folks in the media have been screaming bloody murder. How dare the New York Times commit an act of journalism by telling people something they didn't already know about this. And, like from The Guardian and all kinds of liberal bloggers, and apparently even one of the paper's own columnists, Jamel Bowie, was on Blue Sky. That's the containment unit they have for the most annoying progressives. They used to be on Twitter. They kind of were, it's kind of like Ghostbusters. They round them up, they put them in the containment unit. Now they're on Blue Sky. And Bowie was on Blue Sky, and he says, quote, I think you should tell your readers if your source is a Nazi, unquote. Now, I think conceivably some other New York Times news employees did not like being accused of spreading Nazi propaganda. And I just, Craig, as listeners probably know, in addition to writing for National Review, I write for the Washington Post. Washington Post is a large mainstream media newspaper. I write for the op-ed page. There are things in the Washington Post that I don't always agree with. Yeah. When I signed on, the Post said, I said, what was the rules on critiquing other people who write for the paper? And they said, play nice. And so I just kind of decided at that point, I'm just not going to say anything about other people who write for the Post. I don't want to be seen as a guy who picks fights. I think it's reasonable to ask, for employers to ask them to not instigate conflicts with your coworkers. Apparently, Bowie didn't get that memo. And I just want to point out, Craig, I didn't say a darn thing about Taylor Lorenz when she was working at the Washington Post. So
Yeah.
if I could hold all that in, Bowie, man, you got no excuse, right? Like that's
funny.
how dare you? But ultimately, I think it's very revealing that a good portion of the progressive intelligentsia believes that if the New York Times finds something about Mamdani that makes him look bad, i.e., he claimed to be black or African American when he's applying to colleges, which by the way, he's 33, so it's not that long ago. Like this was in Obama's first year of his presidency. Yeah. It's not ancient history, right? That they should not report that it's somehow a betrayal, that somehow they're destroying journalism by telling their readers things he did. And I think it just reveals this. The other thing, I'm sure a lot of listeners are probably shouting at their speakers right now and saying, well, isn't this like Elizabeth Warren? Yes, exactly. Yes. And the lesson of this is, if you're Mamdani or you're Elizabeth Warren, if you're a progressive with some degree of power or status, well, then it's okay to lie about your racial heritage. If you are a Rachel Dolezal, right, just some pale nobody, then no, you're not allowed to do that, and there'll be terrible consequences for that, and you'll be turned into a national punchline. But when Mamdani doesn't, hey, who among us hasn't really misled people about our heritage, right?
Who hasn't lied about being black? I mean, come on, we've all no. I thought it was interesting that they also revealed his SAT scores. Did you think that was a little bit too much of a deep dive? Where they're saying that he scored a 2140 out of 2400, which was low for a white person to apply for Columbia, but above the average for people they would have accepted within the ethnicities he claimed he was.
Yeah. We should probably point out, Craig, that the way that they've rated and weighted the SATs has changed over the years.
Yes.
So for all of our listeners, yes, you did score higher than Mamdani. The second, like, who do SAT scores matter to? Well, if you did well, they matter a lot to you. If you didn't do well, I know plenty of really bright people who who don't do well on standardized tests. So, but look, I think the other thing people have said is like, his dad was a professor and he got turned down. Really?
Yeah, I know.
Look, here's the thing: it's not like an economics course would have done Mamdani any good. When he's talking about seizing the means of production and
sure,
I suppose, like, here's the thing: people might say, "Oh, why are we talking about this? Why does this matter?" And you could say, "Okay, it doesn't matter," but let's point out, it's not like Mamdani has a lot of things he's done in the state legislature for us to discuss and dissect. He's introduced 3 bills that became law. His free buses thing was a pilot program, and then they chose not to extend it. He ran unopposed in 2 of his 3 elections. Like this guy just got here. There's not a ton to talk about. So, nature abhors a vacuum. When I'll come out seemingly out of nowhere to become the front runner for be the next mayor of New York City, a very fairly influential job, and the sort of thing lots of Democrats are looking at, saying, "Aha, that's what Americans really are looking for, is a soft on Al Qaeda communist. That's what's going to sell in New York City." We'll see. Like, I think it's only natural for people to ask questions about his background, because that's what's there. That's the only story that there is.
Right. Yeah, and this is typical procedure for once you try to be a politician. You get your full background thrown out to the world, and we get to judge it. It's amazing they're mad. They're almost as mad as when Jon Stewart says something that's anti-democratic, and then they get mad at him too.
Yeah. Look, in the end, there are certain, look, let's face it, there are times, there are criticisms that are unfair. There are times that are nothing burgers of a story that get blown up to a thing. But for a decent number of, let's just say, the most vocal progressives on social media, the problem is not that a conservative argument is unfair or that it's not telling the full story. The problem is that the conservative argument exists. Yes. And in their minds, it really shouldn't.
Why has the housing market absolutely tanked? When is the right time to buy a house? Market uncertainty is everywhere, including AI, tariffs. Is the Fed lowering interest rates? Don't expect the housing market to recover anytime soon.
Check out the Watchdog on Wall Street podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast.
All right, and we're on to our crazy of the bad, good, and crazy for the martinis today. And this one definitely feels like you deserve a couple of them. Maria seems to deserve a couple of them. I love this story, actually, Jim. You found a topic about how the Harris campaign tried to strategize going up against Donald Trump, and instead of listening to the people they brought in to help them get independents and conservatives, they told that person to shut up and stand in the corner, kind of like Biden, I think, was doing. What do you want to say about this one?
Sure. This was in Politico Playbook newsletter, and it's from some new book coming out, saying that Maria Kamala, now it describes her as a Democratic official,
No.
I met her many years ago. In fact, I looked back and I figured it had to be Chris Christie's first campaign for governor, so probably 2009.
Wow.
But as implied, she was working for Chris Christie, who was a
Yes.
maybe not everybody's favorite Republican, and maybe not a diehard conservative, but a Republican. And so I thought of her as a Republican talking head. Now, since then, she's gone to work for Andrew Cuomo and various other Democrats. But she was brought on to the Harris campaign, particularly aiming to trying to win over independents and what they characterized as soft Republican votes. So she, for whatever you think of this, like Kamala, it sounds like wrote a bunch of memos saying, here's how you appeal to this demographic. And the advice doesn't seem crazy, right? She said, she wrote a memo saying in the final week saying the strategy was not working. You haven't given these types of voters a reason to vote for them. She said you need to differentiate yourself from Biden. You need to acknowledge where the Democratic Party has gone wrong, such as missing the mark on urban crime, transitioning too quickly to electric cars, and neglecting border security. Probably our listeners are like, yeah, boy, I would sit up and take notice, right?
Sure.
And it also says making January 6th the final focus of her campaign was a mistake, and she should not end it with a speech on the ellipse and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Clearly, the Harris campaign did not listen to this advice at all.
No.
I'm sure Maria Kamala, I don't know if making these changes would have won the race for Harris. I think it would have been more competitive. I think a lot of voters were looking for some sort of acknowledgement of what had gone wrong during the Biden presidency and what she was going to do differently.
Yeah.
I think it was an acknowledgement that the Democratic Party had gone too far to the left and that she was going to steer things in a more centrist direction. I think all that would it have won? I don't know, but then you probably wouldn't have gone 0 for 7 in the swing states. So,
Sure.
So I wonder if Maria Kamala is looking at this and saying, why was I brought on? What was the point of hiring me if you weren't going to listen to me? Or whether she's just like collecting the checks and saying, okay, fine, But interesting to see how much the Harris campaign could have been quite different if they had listened to an advisor that they thought was worth hiring to give them that advice.
Yeah, they wanted an outside perspective, and then they pretty much rejected it. I love that she pushed hard for Harris to do Joe Rogan, too, by the way. I don't know why Three Martini Lunch wasn't on here for things that she should do. But pushing hard to do Joe Rogan and that not happening either was probably a bad move, to say the least.
Yeah, so and a couple of the other campaign books talked about this, and it sounded like the argument from the Harris campaign was Rogan was giving us a runaround. He wanted us to come to Austin, to Texas. We weren't going to spend a whole day going to Texas. I'm sitting there thinking, if you do Rogan, you surprise people. If you do Rogan, you reach a whole bunch of potential voters who are not going to listen to Kamala Harris in any other way.
Yeah.
You have a chance to make a good impression. You have a chance to change the mind. Would another rally in the Philadelphia suburbs, was that really going to change it? Was that a more cost-effective thing? Sure. And then just broadly, it just in light of all the other stories of dysfunction we've heard about the Harris campaign, why hire Maria Kamala if you're not going to listen to any of this advice? If you're not going to was the point just to have ideas and they didn't decide I didn't like it? It was please think outside the box. Yeah. Oh no, not that outside the box. Not get back in the box. We want very predictable, safe recommendations.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and by the way, the other thing I would have said about the Rogan conversation specifically is Trump did it. Once Trump does it, if you're Harris, you got to make every attempt to do it.
The other thing is Rogan. First of all, remember this is a guy who was a Bernie bro. It's been fascinating to hear Democrats say we need our own Joe Rogan. You had him.
He was there.
He wasn't just a Democrat. He seemed like a pretty, lefty Democrat.
Yes.
And you became so, I don't know whether you want to say it was, woke feminism. I don't know if you want to say it was scolding and nanny statish. Rogan can lay out the evolution in his beliefs or his, as he sees fit. But it just seems like the inability to sit down and have a pleasant conversation with Joe Rogan is a strong indication of how off track the Democrats have gotten. Rogan is not a hostile interviewer. He usually is very amiable and willing to listen to whoever's sitting in front of him. Sometimes in bad cases, sometimes he has some guys on there who are nut jobs who he probably shouldn't be so credulous. But but the idea, the fact that this fact that Harris seemed to be afraid of doing a Rogan interview,
right,
and the fact that Walz was afraid of the debate with Vance says a lot about them as politicians, that they didn't really have the confidence, their convictions to go into what could be a tough arena, say, this is what I stand for, this is why it's right, take it or leave it. And I think that's, if you can't do that, the presidency's probably not for you.
Yeah, to be honest, Walz was right to be afraid of J.D. Vance.
The moment was bigger than him, yes.
It was, for sure. All right, cool. That's great. What else do we need to do?
The only thing we need to do, Craig, is to remind people that you are Craig Collins, filling in for Greg. And I am Jim Garrity from National Review. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. Also, thank you for your 5-star ratings. In fact, we thank you for your 4-star ratings. But anything less than that, you keep your opinion to yourself. Get us on your home devices. All you have to do is say, play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. And the National Security Agency that's listening in will take care of the rest. Get all of us on X. Craig is at Radio Craig C. I am at Jim Garrity. And Greg Corombos is, shockingly, at Greg Corombos. Have a great week. Have a great weekend. Have a great Tuesday. Is it today Tuesday?
Whatever day it is.
There are unconfirmed reports that today is Tuesday. Have a great day and see us tomorrow on the 3 Martini Lunch.